My name is Schmidt. I'm currently the general manager of the software products division at Sun Microsystems. I've been at Sun for about 5 years, and I would like to be a better speaker. I'm completely self-taught as a speaker, and I find that I'm spending more and more time talking to larger and larger groups, many of whom I don't know. So the problem that I'm having is that all the skills that I developed when the group was very small or when I was a researcher don't work for a larger group. I find all the things that you talked about earlier, such as people don't know what you're thinking unless you show it to them. All of those things are just different and unfamiliar to me. For example, the division is now so large that every time I talk to it, it's the largest audience I've ever spoken to. So I view every speech as a challenge. I have no sense of time. I don't know how to organize my speaking stuff. I try to be spontaneous, but because of the nature of the constituencies in the group, the spontaneity might get me into trouble. So there's a concern there. My name is Schmidt. I'm currently the general manager of the software products division at Sun Microsystems. I've been at Sun for about 5 years, and I would like to be a better speaker. I'm completely self-taught as a speaker, and I find that I'm spending more and more time talking to larger and larger groups, many of whom I don't know. So the problem that I'm having is that all the skills that I developed when the group was very small or when I was a researcher don't work for a larger group. I find all the things that you talked about earlier, such as people don't know what you're thinking unless you show it to them. All of those things are just different and unfamiliar to me. For example, the division is now so large that every time I talk to it, it's the largest audience I've ever spoken to. So I view every speech as a challenge. I have no sense of time. I don't know how to organize my speaking stuff. I try to be spontaneous, but because of the nature of the constituencies in the group, the spontaneity might get me into trouble. So there's a concern there. My background is that I have a PhD in computer science and was a researcher at Xerox PARC before joining Sun when it was very small. I live in Los Altos, California, married with two small children. But I'm sort of your typical Silicon Valley workaholic type. How's my clock doing? The other thing that I'm interested in is the sense of how you're going to work on not just speaking style but also presenting style. One of the things I've noticed is that as the number of levels of management in the organization get larger, I find that I'm judged by people who never normally interact with me. So for example, a visual cue, like a frown, is a very, very bad thing to somebody, and I didn't know I was doing it. So I'm quite concerned about working on those things as well.
The most important quality for a manager is?
I think that the absolutely most important quality for a manager is the ability to lead people. When I look at my organization and the people that I have worked with, they all divide into groups. And there's basically leaders and people who can't lead. And leadership is a skill that I don't know how to teach. It's sort of you figure it out, or you've learned it, or something like that. Leadership is something which seems to come from within. It's something where you put your own style and your own emphasis, and you get people motivated and you drive them, but you drive them in a way that is inspiring and makes them excited about working in the environment that you're in. Leadership is something where when you interview someone or you meet someone, you can tell almost intuitively whether they're a leader or not by whether they seem to be organized, whether they seem to understand that you take charge and you make things happen. In fact, what I've discovered is that it's much more important to be a good leader than to actually understand what you're doing. Because, in fact, if you're a good leader, you can hire people who can teach you things that thank you. I'm here to tell you about some of the things that I've learned since I joined the working world. One of the things that I have noticed is that you can go to the texture, to the literature world, and you can get an idea of what people who you might respect have said about these kinds of subjects. And in particular, I'm a fan of Prince Machiavelli, who said, that where there is no conflict, there is no life. And that's the point that I want to make today. What I've learned is that most people get stuck when they get into a working world. They sit around and things become common. They don't take things seriously enough, and they don't recognize that change is part of the world. My experience, given that I had come out of a research background, was that I expected that people would sit around and they would have interesting discussions and they would all be very knowledgeable and they would agree. And in fact, the most successful companies are one where there is enormous conflict. And that conflict is the way that people become excellent. It's okay to have different points of view. It is okay for people to disagree. I'll give you an example. At Sun, there was an early proposal to build a product which a number of people, including myself, were absolutely certain was going to fail. It would have failed because the software wouldn't have worked. It would have failed because they wanted to put too little memory on the machine. And after the product was approved, went through an early design cycle, and the pricing model for the memory systems changed. And all of a sudden, it was much less expensive to put additional memory on it. Meanwhile, our software had become larger. And because we tolerated conflict, because we allowed people to disagree, and because we entertained the fact that an old viewpoint which had been discarded could come back, we were able to raise the problem again, and we were able to get the product canceled. Now, it's very, very important that when you set up these kinds of conflicting management structures, that you recognize that it has to be balanced. Conflict does not mean that people are killing one another. Conflict means that there's a process by which there is disagreement. Call it creative disagreement. Call it motivation through yelling. Call it motivation through fear. An example of some of the costs of this approach are the impact that it has on people who can't understand that this is a reasonable way to operate a company, like engineers. Engineers think that the world should be rational, that somehow decisions should be made and that they should continue to be true. So one of the tremendous costs of motivation through fear and conflict is that you can't really communicate this management style to the people who work for the company. Another example of this is the conflict that you can get among divisions, and that by allowing this conflict and by allowing the charters to become unclear, you can encourage people to go and find their path, find their career path, or make a contribution and fill the voids that occur. This conflict leads to growth in companies and is really the only way to deal with the high rates of change that we find in the technology industries. Nothing in school prepares you for this. That was the thing that really annoyed me the most. All the textbooks, all the classes and whatnot. In fact, if you look in the computer industry, every one of the successful computer companies is run by a real tough guy somewhere high up in the management chain who has established a tone of conflict, a professional, constructive conflict tone. The benefits that you get from the standpoint of the company include the ability to compete and the ability to make a lot of money. What I want you to do is I want you next week to get out there and get into a meeting and have an argument. So, are there any questions?
Yeah, how about our benefits? I mean, you know, what's in it for us?
Well, Bert, the company every year goes through a very broad evaluation of our benefits program. And as you know, we pay a certain amount of money to fund all the benefits. In fact, we recently we added some benefits, and we were able to add them by renegotiating the contracts that we had before. So every year we go through a process whereby we poll the audience and the Sun employees, and the Sun employees as a group help select the benefits, and that's how we resolve that.
I guess that I have a real question about this whole issue of conflict, as you spoke so passionate about. And the question is that that's probably BS. Why can't we just have a very nice, ongoing world that we can all work as a team instead of having to fight with each other? I mean, it sounds to me that that's not the way to run a company.
Well, I simply don't think that that's realistic. It seems to me that the successful companies in the valley, and in my experience, are ones where there is a tolerance for multiple opinion, and people end up, through some kind of a process, coming to the right decision. And at Sun, for example, we have a rule that it's okay to, you can agree and implement, you can disagree and implement, or you can not care and implement. But you can't not implement a final decision. Next question.
I run a little engineering section. You don't get down to our level very often because you're out driving around in Ferrari at the company cafeteria a lot. But we work a lot, many hours, okay? And we'd like to have access to workstation after hours to be able to implement some of our ideas. And Apple's got them, Virgin Tech, everybody gives their employees some benefits and stuff. And I'd like to take a Sun 4 home and have that in my house. And I think my engineers would greatly benefit the company. Why don't you give us that expanded flexibility to do that?
Well, every year we have looked at trying to do that, and every year we've discovered that our customers need the workstations, and it's so hard to get enough workstations out to our customer base that we can't get enough to give them to you to take it home. We've always wanted to, but we haven't been able to. I hope that this year we will of course budget them, and hopefully the higher volumes, the lower cost per seat, will allow us to do that, and we'll get into the program gradually.
That's the same thing you said last year. I mean, you know, I wonder, you know, how can you just sit here now, a year later, when you told us just the same thing? I'll just wait until next year. I know what you're going to tell us next year. You don't have enough ramps, right?
Well, you're absolutely right. That's exactly what I said last year, and I might have to say it next year, but I'll try as hard as I can to make the answer be different.
If they wanted to.
Again, personal.
It's really tough, isn't
Yeah.
it? Because that's our habit pattern. It's a kind of one-on-one, which doesn't work for a group setting.
And you feel like, you know, to try to shut that person out.
Well, I had the same thing. Do you know when I was talking to you about your Ferrari and all this other stuff? I had a production control guy say, hey, you guys drive around in Mercedes and you're outside the factory. You don't know what the hell's going on. And you're in your ivory tower somewhere. Excuse me.
Well, the best one is officers' compensation. We think that you all are overpaid.
Yes.
And that actually comes up.
How would you answer it?
I actually thought about that. The way I would answer it is I would say something to the effect of, what we try to do is we try to hire the very best people at every level in the company. It's a corporate policy. Hire the very best from the president all the way down. And the reality is that those people come with a competitive compensation package. And Sun's commitment to you is to pay the market value for you. And that applies to the officers as well.
Okay, good.
The most important thing that I learned about myself was that I don't look on television the way I thought I did, since I had never seen myself before. What I learned was that I need to speak much more forcefully, I need to take more pauses, and I need to be much more emphatic while still communicating the basic values that I have. If I look at the day, when I started off, I was very languid or weak in terms of my presenting, and now I feel much more self-confident about speaking to people and making that point. If I continue to do this and I make a point of it, I will get better.
Great. Okay, after feedback for Eric. How did he come across?
I think he's absolutely right. I think that the change has been very, very good.
I claim my delta is high.
Thanks, sir.
No,
Voice.
Yeah.
Voice. It's the voice.
The voice picked up.
It's the voice.
Energy picked up.
Energy level.
Facial animation, boom, way up.
Yeah. So I have it in me. I just have to find it.
And you know, with that goes your credibility. Your credibility goes up as all those other things increase.
Great. Okay, thanks, Eric. Any?